Hey, and welcome to Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I am your host. Thanks so much for joining me again. I had a great couple of past episodes, and this episode is going to be really fun. Hopefully, I won't take too much of my guest's time, but I am really delighted to have Josh Daws on the show. He is the host of the Great Awokening podcast, which is really clever title, if I do say so. And you can go check that out. But Josh, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chase.
So, Josh, it's been an interesting connection that I've made with you. As some of my closest friends know, through the Twitter sphere, whatever you want to call it, there's all sorts of people you can follow and interact with. And there's been several threads that you've put out there that, man, it was just like, I had to show my wife. I was like, this is just exactly how I'm feeling and seeing and sensing things are. And so I really appreciate Josh's engagement on that platform, or at least the thoughts he shares. Some of those actually have to do with his own story. And so I wanted to start off with your story, because one of your threads that you put out there, which I know everybody kind of dunks on threads being a little bit annoying, and some of them should maybe be turned into blogs or article, but this one was really good. And I think it was on the evangelical elite. And I think it was kind of sharing your story. Is that right?
Yeah. So I had I spent a lot of time actually working for a seeker-sensitive church, and was I grew up a pastor's kid. I grew up in evangelical world, in the 90s, and was very much, in youth group during purity culture, and a lot of the things that a lot of kind of evangelical elites are embarrassed about now. So I get it. I get all of that. That's where I come from. And when I graduated, or when I went to college, I found a seeker-sensitive church that kind of threw off all of that, stuff that I was embarrassed about, the stuff that I don't want to invite my friends to church because it's embarrassing. And it was like a revelation to me. Like, oh, this is it. This is amazing. This is a way to do church that doesn't make us look silly or stupid or backwards. And so I went all in on the seeker-sensitive movement. Ended up working, my wife and I both working for a large seeker-sensitive church, and we're all about making church services relevant, and the rock and roll music to open the service with, and everything. So that was our story, and just in the thread you're referring to, I just talk about how I came to see just how that way of approaching evangelism just was not healthy, at least in my own life. To the point where, I would regularly kind of throw other Christians under the bus as if they were an obstacle to evangelism. Like one of the things I mentioned in the thread is we would have bad Christian movie nights and invite our non-Christian friends to, and we'd rip on Christian movies. And granted, there's a lot of really cheesy Christian movies, but as a way of evangelism, it just, I became really convicted about that over time, that, man, these are part of the church that Christ died for. And I'm embarrassed. I see them as an obstacle to winning people.
Yeah, it's an odd thing to do. And I think I've seen that, whether you call the missional movement a version of seeker-sensitive or not, I've seen that even in what I would call the missional movement, which kind of prides itself on, like, we're different. We're not, we're not like those Christians. And so they're very eager to portray an image. And I think it's done with some noble intentions, that we're not like them. So some secular people have a conception of Christians. Like, I was just watching a movie, There Will Be Blood, last week. Actually, it was a horrible choice. I watched it on an airplane, like, in the morning, and it was, like, so depressing. But in the movie, they have this kind of cult figure versus Daniel Day-Lewis. And I think that cult figure really epitomizes what a lot of secular people think of Christians, which is kind of these wild-haired, kind of crazy, egomaniac, greedy people. And so I think for a lot of pastors, evangelists, or just Christians in general, they're very eager to say, well, I'm not that, And so in order to show you I'm not that, I'm going to make fun of the things you associate with Christian culture. And so there's kind of this diminishment of Christian culture within a lot of pastoral thinking, where Christian culture is kind of despised and looked down upon. And like you said, I get it. I grew up in a mega church in the South, so lots of Left Behind, lots of like Bible Man and Bible drills, and just the whole
Power team.
yeah, the whole shebang. So I get it, but man, what I would give for my kids to get some of that in the context I'm in, just like
Yeah.
Awanas, that would be awesome
Yeah.
at this point,
And it's super sad to me to see evangelical leaders like rejoicing at the downfall of Christian culture. You know, I'm not sure what they expect the alternative to be. Like if suddenly we tear down that, people are going to come rushing to the church. Like, no, I feel like the Christian culture, as cheesy and as weird as it could be sometimes, had a preservative effect for many years that I'm grateful that I grew up in.
For sure, me too. And for you, you were out in LA. You moved
Hmm.
out there, and were you helping with a church plant, or were you part of a church plant?
Yeah, so we moved out there. Moved my family out there with my brother, pursuing a career in filmmaking, and God had other purposes for us out there. We ended up starting a church in North Hollywood with some dear friends, and it was it was really cool, but it was very much part of following that same model, that kind of missional model of like, we're in the city, we love the city, very much probably Tim Keller inspired, run to the cities, and if people are in cities, and if you love people, then you love cities, that kind
Really?
of mentality.
Yep.
um, and it was all, I love everybody that was involved with that. It was very well intentioned, and I think there's a very real concern for evangelism that I think we can learn from the missional movement. And I see a lot of people tear it down, but there is some really positive elements that have come from it. But over time, I began to see we'd kind of hide the difficult things. It's not that we denied the truth of Scripture. It's that we don't talk about that. It's kind of like Bruno. We don't talk about it. And we would see it over, the pastor of that church would do about once a year, every 18 months, he'd do a series on biblical sexuality.
Hmm.
And every time that happened, we'd have people that were horrified to learn that they had been attending a church that is not LGBT affirming.
Right.
And it just began to really bother me that, like, why are we hiding this? And it was always the same thing. It's not like they would suddenly get to that message and then, oh yeah, you know what? The past 18 months with this church have convinced me that they're right and I should consider this. No, it's they always get mad and leave. And it's like, I'm not sure what this winsome posture and downplaying with the, whispering about sexual sin is accomplishing.
Right.
And it began to be really sad to see so many people that we loved and were in community with just begin to kind of deconstruct their faith as they embraced social justice. That was kind of the catalyst for starting my podcast, just seeing so many people that we knew and loved just head down that social justice path to deconstruction. And I don't know.
Yeah. It's a big deal. I mean, this is a common tactic in church planting where the Keller approach is you float an A doctrine on a B doctrine or something to that effect, where what you're trying to do is intentionally obscure the hard truth with something that's more like agreeable to people in the hopes that one day they'll agree with it. But oftentimes, now that's an interesting ideological and philosophical approach. Like we could tease that out and look at the scriptures and see maybe there's places in the scriptures where that's employed. But to use that as kind of your boilerplate strategy and your go-to, in your tool belt, it just seems to not have the effect that they intend. They intend, a lot of church planners intend for it to set a table and let people kind of come to the table and like, look, we all have common ground. And I look like personally, that's a beautiful vision. Like, yeah, like we have a lot in common. And you'll get organizations like Braver Angels or some other organizations that are trying to kind of reimagine this kind of liberal ethos where we all have common ground and we can unite around certain core principles. Also, like, in service of what? In service of what? Maybe we should be louder on certain core doctrines, and that's going to I don't know. I was talking about it with Kim yesterday, my wife yesterday, and I was like, we could wait to talk about some of this stuff with people from the stage. And even interpersonally, there's some people where you're like, I'm going to take a longer approach. I'm not going to lead with this kind of stuff. But if we do that for the flock, there's Christians there that need to be fed from the Word of God on core truths of Christianity. And if we obscure the hard stuff because we're trying to win the lost, and therefore we don't feed the sheep on these core issues, then I think we're actually the net gain, if we so to speak, is a loss because these Christians are getting caught up in all this stuff while we are trying to win the lost, which is a good desire, but we're not feeding the sheep with core truths. And so you're going to have to pick. Are you going to say from the stage what Christians believe about marriage? You could say it in the most, authentic, convictional, and sincere way, but it's still going to it just is what it is. And you have to equip the sheep and you have to feed the sheep, I should say. And if you're feeding the sheep, that will offend some of the goats, and there's
Yeah.
just no way around it.
Yeah. And what ends up happening is pastors are modeling how the people in the pews are going out into their workplace and handling these issues. And so it's like it becomes, it's not just like that environment. It's I don't know, it's people are taking that kind of approach out into the real world, and it waters down kind of what we believe. And
Absolutely.
then you're left with this kind of really high level, basic, Christianity, just Jesus, and don't worry about that other stuff. And yeah,
it's a pared down version of Christianity, which really is a survival attempt that just won't. It's not going to go well, and so it's really, really sad. This kind of gets into the second topic, which is, and I don't want to jump over too much of your story because I really do enjoy hearing people's stories and where they're coming from. So, go to LA. I want to talk about the idea of relational evangelism. Would you say relational evangelism was kind of the ethos of that approach, or I guess maybe help me understand what is relational evangelism?
sure. In my understanding, relational evangelism is the idea that you don't want to be too forceful. You want to take time to build relationships, to live a good life in, with Christian ethics, love your neighbor, and that eventually someone will notice that and ask you what's different about you. And for years, that was my go-to strategy because I'm an introvert. I don't, no one likes to have those hard conversations. There's very few people who are really gifted at direct evangelism. They'll, knock on the doors. Hey, do you know Jesus? And I thank God for those people. They're great. So, but relational evangelism was just very appealing to me in that, okay, yep, I can do that. I can be in these secular spaces. I can live out my faith in a way that hopefully people will see and one day ask. And just, for me, after decades of trying that approach, I just had to reevaluate and like, is this really working? Is this doing anything? I don't feel like no one's ever done that end goal of like, hey, what's different about you? Can you tell me about Jesus?
Right.
And I think I found, at least in my life, there may be others who are successful at, seeing those opportunities and taking them, in my life, it had become a crutch for um, evangelism's hard. I don't want to be in uncomfortable situations. So, yeah, I'm just doing relational evangelism and then checking that box, and I'm good. And so I think it was, I really think that's when my Twitter began to take off, is when I stopped trying to kind of hide the fact that I'm a Christian, and not that I ever really truly hid it, but I'd be more bold with, you know, sharing doctrine and sharing, what I'm thinking about, certain biblical teachings and stuff. And just, being more open with those conversations with people,
Yeah, and
not afraid to take that. Yeah.
people generally enjoy that kind of relationship more, honestly, is what I've discovered in evangelism, is that I adopted the same style and I didn't have a category for it. Was there a thinker that promoted relational evangelism or something?
I'm sure there was. For me, it's just something I kind of picked up over the years,
Okay.
all my time in evangelical spaces. But I tell you, one of the interesting things, a turning point in that for me, as I really began to think about this the last couple of years, we were at the pool the summer of 2020, when all the COVID stuff was happening, and talking with a neighbor about COVID restrictions and stuff. And she was telling us, upset that people weren't masking and stuff. And I'm thinking, relational evangelism, I don't need to argue. I don't need to tell her what I think. So I just kind of nod and smile and go along. And then that same day, we were at a baseball game or something. So it might have been a little bit later when things had picked back up, but was talking to another guy who just flat out told me, what he thought about masks and mandates and stuff and how he hated them. And it struck me that, like, both of these people are not believers, and they were not afraid to tell me what they thought about something. And I'm being a chameleon with both of these people, because I want to be evangelistic. Like, how that I'm basing my entire approach to evangelism on a falsehood of this milk toast version of me that doesn't have strong opinions on things, because I want you to ask me about Jesus. It's like,
Right.
no, okay. The guy at the baseball field, he needs Jesus. The woman at the pool, she needs Jesus. And I can't have, I can't be one thing for one person and one thing for another person. Like, the Holy Spirit, if God's working in their lives, I've got to have an actual relationship with them, and I need to be my actual self and not live by lies of, just trying to tell people what they want to hear. It's like, if I'm ever going to have a real relationship with people, I have to be myself. I have to tell them what I actually think, and I
Right.
trust that the Holy Spirit is going to use that to, you know, open those doors.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something really quickly that a lot of people use to justify this approach. And I want to be clear, like, this can be an approach you employ. Like, these are, they can be one tool in a tool belt. But when you look at the scriptures and you hear Paul say, I became all things to all people, something to that effect, a lot of people who employ relational evangelism, they're like, see, we got to be able to become all things to all people. Well, that's not a justification for hiding what we believe, becoming a chameleon, and just reducing Christianity to some kind of sales pitch. Um,
Mhm.
and I found it so dissatisfying when I was, as we are church planting, and I'm like, well, these people believe really different things than me. And so I stayed curious and stayed in the space and like stayed relationally connected. But all the while, I feel like really frustrated because I'm hiding my convictions about stuff. Man, it was so much more fun when I finally was like, man, I don't think like that. And here's what I think about it. My friend Matt, who's my co-pastor, he's very skilled at this and doing it in a way that's, if we were to redeem the word winsome or whatever biblical, I think there's probably be biblical words I'd rather use, but he does this really well. And and so I've learned a lot from him on this because he does the relational evangelism that a lot of people want to do. He employs it in a really genuine way where he can like share, what he actually thinks about whether it's COVID or whatever else. And what we're going to find is whether you call it tyranny, totalitarianism, kind of like uh, just the state as a whole, statism, as it becomes more metastasized and hardened, there's going to be less things that if you approach relationships and evangelism as relational evangelism, you're going to feel squished out more and more and more and more. And Christianity is going to get pared down into this like just very simplistic thing, not a worldview, not a comprehensive faith, but just like, yeah, but Jesus, and we're just going to stop sharing our thoughts on things. And I think a lot of pastors are adopting that strategy. If I say something about what I think about COVID, well, first of all, that's not what I'm not an expert. And then secondly, somebody's going to be offended. And so I guess I'm not going to say anything. And it's like, man,
Mhm.
I just don't think that's a fun way to live. I don't think that's a God honoring way to live. And I don't think that's helping people in the end. I think it's
Yeah.
actually allowing a lot of the stuff to keep going.
And I think you're missing out on true connections between people. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said that a moment of friendship is born is when one person says to the other, "Oh, what, you too?" When you recognize that common, alignment you have. And I think a lot of Christians have somehow picked up the idea that everyone outside the faith is a radical leftist. And so we have to kind of hide what we might believe politically and on COVID and all this stuff because we have to appeal to what the left, believes. And I think we miss the fact that there are plenty of people to our right that need Jesus. And there's people with all sorts of beliefs out there that need Jesus. And God is going to use each one of us to connect with to build those relationships.
Absolutely. I think of Paul in Ephesus, and you've got, I can't remember who was in charge of the idol market, who kind of like was the main guy who
Hmm.
was upset. Well, if Paul went into that town and his only goal was to win that guy, kind of the most extreme, idol maker, he is
Hmm.
the epicenter, then he might have taken a different approach. But instead, he goes for maximal impact. How can I reach the most people? Well, it's decrying and tearing down these idols. Well, guess what? That's not going to win the idol maker himself. The idol
Right.
maker is going to start a riot and try to kill you. And
Hmm.
so there's this idea where if we go for the most opposite of us and we kind of have this, winsome kind of like, I want to use the word soft approach to evangelism and kind of a hidden approach, then somehow it'll be better for everyone. And I don't see that being the case. The other day you tweeted out, and I think you got a lot of grief for it, like the faithful presence model has been an absolute failure or something like that. Uh, and I tend to agree with you. I read To Change the World. I was recommending that. It's still, I mean, I still recommend it to people. It's a really helpful way to get people curious about cultural engagement in a interesting way. And I think I embrace the faithful presence model goes along with relational evangelism because it's like if I'm just in those spaces, if I can get in these institutions, then eventually somebody's going to ask me about Jesus, or I'll just be a faithful presence within it, and that's going to lead to cultural change. Well, I'm not seeing it. I mean, I'm sure it's happened, but by and large, a lot of these people that have adopted, like Francis Collins or others, it just doesn't seem to have the effect they want. So then we have to go,
Hmm.
why? What are we going to do differently? How are we going to live differently? And this is really hard. This is why I like talking to you as someone you thought about going to seminary. You didn't go to seminary. You're not a pastor. You're just a normal guy. You're a Christian who's just trying to process out loud. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's how I've experienced these kind of cultures in the church and these kind of approaches. And you're providing some pushback. So I think that's really great.
Yeah, and I do want to point out I put faithful in in quotes in
Yeah.
that tweet because that I think that really is if we're going to be in these spaces, and I think we should. I'm not calling for the worst caricature of Rod Dreher's retreat, which I don't believe Rod is saying that, but that's what people um, think a lot of times. I'm not calling for full cultural retreat. I think we should be in these spaces.
Right.
I just think we need to really think hard about what it means to be faithful in these spaces.
Right.
And I think I talked about it. It might have been the other tweet, but I've seen so many people in high position that seem to be accruing all this cultural capital that one day they're going to use, but not yet.
Right.
That day's going to come, but it's not today. It's not this fight. And
Right.
we've got to have a better way of evaluating and determining when is it right to cash that in and say, no, can't go along with this. I can't
Right.
just sit by while this is happening.
And I think you're right. It takes the Holy Spirit kind of leading us. And I think, the way you just described it makes me think of I think a lot of Christians are waiting kind of for that big reveal, where it's like, now I'm in a powerful position. Now all of a sudden, ta-da, like I'm a
Yeah.
Christian. And it's like, oh, what? No, you tricked us. And it's like, why is that the goal? Why is the goal to trick people? Like, now to get practical, like I have one guy in my church who I was talking with on the phone last week, and he's going to join a nonprofit board in the town. It may be bigger than the town, but it's something he's passionate about. But it's very secular. I mean, it's not an organization dedicated to Jesus, and they're going to put out statements that he doesn't agree with, and he knows this. And so his question was, one, should I join it in the first place? And two, what should I do when I get in that space? And so my encouragement to him was like, if they'll have you, which they're saying they want you, join it. And then when they try to release a statement, say no. Like, it's really not, I mean, like, I know that seems really simplistic, but at the end of the day, like if you can get your foot in the door and you can, have relationships with people that don't believe in Jesus, and you can help shape an organization, get in there. But when you sense like, hey, this is a contra-creational, contra-Christian, anti-Christian approach to these matters, whether it's matters of justice or environment or whatever it is, you should say something. And if they say, well, we're going to do it anyways, and say, okay, cool, I'm going to resign, like, and move on. Like, I know
Yeah.
that sounds really dumbed down, but like, I don't know why it's so complicated.
Right. Yeah. I think Aaron Wren has talked about his three negative world, neutral world, and positive world.
Yeah.
I think he wrote about it in First Things. But we are solidly in hostile, negative world now, and I think that kind of faithful presence where I'll just be there and hopefully rub off on people is, we're not in that world anymore. We're in a world where these organizations are going to be making statements that are hostile and are bad for people, and that the way we love our neighbors is by opposing what these organizations are doing. And it's Christians have become soft. It's like we have to find that backbone to stand up and say, no, I can't go along with that. And if it's going to cost me my job, if it's going to cost me my reputation, so be it. And believe me, I know that's not easy. But I think that's the state of the world we're in, and we really need pastors and evangelical leaders to start discipling people and helping people to think through these issues.
Absolutely. There's kind of three things that I've discovered in ministry that have really helped put flesh on the bones of what we're talking about. Three suggestions we've tried to help people with in our church who, like when we planted, we weren't solidly, and we didn't even know the word relational evangelism, but that was kind of our approach: faithful witness, relational evangelism. And what we sense is like, gosh, we're not reaching people. Like we don't seem to be like we're loving our neighbor, like we're serving our city and we're making some connections, and that's cool. But there are three questions that really, if you like put your finger on a pressure point, if you like identify the tension, and it was this: when was the last time you offered to pray for a coworker, like to their face, or to text them and be like, hey, can I pray for you about that? Or what can I pray for you about? And that's outing yourself as someone who, I'm a praying
Yeah.
person. In Christian, maybe in Southern Christian culture, that's more normal. But out here, it's like, oh, like, yeah, like I'm not just sending good vibes into the universe. Like I want to pray
Yeah.
to the living God. The other one was, hey, you should come to church with me this weekend. It's really great. Like it's a really simple like invitation. You don't have to say I'm a Christian, therefore I believe all these things and I'm against what you stand. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about really simple bids, invitations. And the third one was, uh, and this was really interesting to watch people react this way. It wasn't supposed to be just to get people to react, but it really highlighted it. Is we're a church that planted with a solidly like missional posture. We didn't have some, big launch. There were no flyers. There was no advertising. It was, I mean, looking back, it was really dumb. But we finally we're like, hey, we can get a good deal on door hangers, and so we're gonna print out some door hangers. And in Boulder, we had kind of spurned that idea because a lot of people hate the idea of a door hanger, and it's kind of like being afraid of the radical left. It's like some people are going to get upset that you're using paper, right? And they're going to be like, you don't care about the environment. And so we had kind of bowed to that critique, and then we were like, you know what? Forget it. Let's just try it. And so we did it, but a lot of our people were really uncomfortable with that because we were saying we want you to go out and prayer walk in our town, and we want you to hang door hangers, invite people to church. And then if you see those people, if you knock on the door, we'd love for you to have a gospel conversation. And our people were like, whoa, what are you saying? Like, that is not our style. That's not our vibe here. We are supposed to be kind of this, hey, like, we're not going to say too many things offensive. We're going to blend in. We're not going to draw attention to ourselves. And so that was pre 2016. That was 2014, 2015, I think, when we started trying to do that. But I watched people kind of get really uncomfortable. I had some really good conversations, and I really think they were good. Like, we encouraged people to start wearing shirts that, like, we printed out shirts that had our church's name on them. And we were like, hey, when you go to the farmer's market, like, throw on a shirt of your church. Like, and our people were like, that's weird though. And I was like, but why though? Like, why? You would wear any other shirt. And it's just an interesting way to start conversations. But just these little things that really helped push our people to a place. And I don't want to push for the sake of pushing. Some people just aren't there yet. They're not ready. Maybe they're actually, baby Christians are more eager to do this stuff. It's the ones that
Yeah,
have been incubated in the secret system model that take a little time to warm up to it. And not everyone's called with the same gifting to be, out there and all about it. But if we don't have that tool in our tool belt, I think we're missing out on something.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. What was the first question?
It was, hey, how can I pray for you?
Yeah. That's such a normal part of Christian life that we should be easy for us.
Yeah,
If we really believe that our prayers are going up to the living God,
yeah,
we should be eager to do that. That should be like, that's good. I'm going to start doing that.
yeah. Just to a coworker, hey, can I pray? I did that with, it was on, like, this is a confession of mine. I'm a pastor, and I was saying that to my neighbors, and I felt uncomfortable because I had been so trapped in this model. And it felt so freeing to just kind of be like, hey, like, I'm a pastor. I live on your street. I'd love to pray for you because that's what Christians do. And that's at least what pastors do. And so it's just a really simple question to ask people. Um, so those were kind of a couple of topics that I've really wanted to dialogue with you about. But one took off recently, and it kind of gets into more of cultural matters. But gosh, it's a really dense topic, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. But you kind of put out a thread on schools, public education, what's going on with education. We're seeing it in our town. We've had families move away because our school district is pushing gender ideology in classrooms and in elementary schools. They're having, organizations come in and do certain plays on sexual identity to elementary schools. And so this is something that I've been thinking about for a few years. And really, it seems like recently it's come to a head with like Leah Thomas and swimming and kind of exposing some of the transgender ideology. And I think trans is finally a cultural tipping point for a lot of people where they're like, yeah, I'm done now. Like Obergefell, they could kind of like, for a lot of like kind of normie American non-Christians, it was like, well, love is love. And then like trans comes along and it's like, what? Like, this is not the same. Um, and there's a word that's being thrown around. It's kind of an in-house debate. And this idea of grooming, public schools grooming kids, and so there's some Christians that believe, we shouldn't use that word because it's either insulting or demeaning or not truly what's happening. But I think you kind of put out a thread that was clarifying. So I wanted you to share that, kind of rehash kind of some of your thinking and what you're seeing on this topic.
Sure. Yeah. That that thread was in response to a meme that had been going around, that the right people on the right had been sharing. Anytime you know somebody would post a libs of TikTok teacher saying something crazy, and the meme was just the Simpsons bus driver saying, "Don't make me tap the sign," and then on the zoomed in on the sign, it says, "It's simple. It's not rocket science. They're just evil and they want to diddle kids." I don't know if I can say that on your podcast. I'm sorry.
And just a warning, if you listen to my podcast with kids in the car, this may be a point at which you may want to just save this for later. I listen to podcasts, and I have to, like, even the Morning Wire. I'll listen to that with my kids in the car. And some episodes, I'm like, even Al Mohler's podcast, I'm like, I'm not going to do this today.
Yep.
But yeah, just a warning to my listeners. But yeah, that is the meme. You can say that.
Okay. So the thread that I wrote was kind of in response to that, just explaining that while that's a very clever meme, it certainly applies to a lot of like the libs of TikTok people who are clearly not right in the head or just plain evil.
Right.
It doesn't fully explain like the entire leftist agenda. And so in the thread, I just kind of unpack how it's not just about diddling kids. It's about ideologically grooming your kids. Like it goes all the way back to Paulo Freire, as a guy who in the 60s who applied critical theory to education and came up with critical pedagogy. And he wrote a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And in that, he talks about the entire goal of education should be to awaken a critical consciousness in students. And to do that, they want to tear down the bond between parents and their children. So they recognize that we are handing our kids over to this institution for the bulk of their week. And they know that's a golden opportunity to tear down those bonds and instill them with a leftist ideology and make them into little social justice warriors, because they believe the children are the future, and if they can get the kids, then they can bring in their Marxist revolution. And so I think the thing that really was like a light bulb moment for me, and it seems to be why the thread took off so much, is just it kind of clicked for me how the critical race theory in schools and the radical gender ideology were connected.
Okay.
So the critical race theory is often what's the first thing that's introduced into a lot of classrooms. Just this idea that, if you're white, that you have inherited all of this privilege and that has been stolen from people of color, and you bear some form of guilt for all of the privilege that you've inherited. Mm-hmm. And so in the thread, I explain how that is tearing down students, and that's basically placing on them a bad identity. You are bad because of these inherited attributes that you were born with. And then the gender ideology, which is properly called queer theory, it's just another branch of critical theory. It comes in and offers like a wide range of positive identities that the kids can step into, and suddenly they're no longer the bad oppressor; they're a celebrated victim.
Oh wow!
Of gender oppression or whatever, queer oppression.
Right.
And so they become celebrated. And once this identity, the reason why the left is so insistent on talking to kids about this is so that they can give them this new identity that is at odds with what they're hearing at home. That's why they don't want to tell they want to keep it secret. They don't want to let the parents know about what's happening, so that once this identity is firmly planted, that they have this manufactured, rift between the parents. So either with the goal of either separating that bond completely, or what we see often is the parents become an ally. So
Mm,
either way, they're getting little revolutionaries. They're either getting the kid and the parent, or the kid separated from the parent.
right.
And it's there's no other word for that other than grooming.
Yeah.
And it's not that they want to, that everyone wants to molest children, but that environment, that secrecy of keeping things from the parents, is creating an environment where predators are drawn to and predators are taking advantage of. So it's
Yeah.
really just, it's super insidious and very alarming. And
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that parents seem to be waking up to it and recognizing it.
For sure. I mean, I don't know what you would call, I mean, I'm sure there's other words, but kind of a predatory approach to letting kids, not not letting, that would be permissive, but in almost indoctrinating, encouraging kids, having secret closets that they can change into and adopt a new identity at school. Uh, it's interesting when I think about it from a Christian education approach, because I send my kids to a local Christian school, um, and I think about how we want to raise up kids and strong kids in the faith. And to me, education is always about discipleship and formation. And so I think that the critical race theory, queer theory, kind of what you described, it's taken advantage of a bunch of naivete regarding kind of the liberal order,
Hmm.
and that somehow we can have this neutral kind of educational approach where it's just math and reading, which I think you can have, and that was possible. And so I think that what they're touching on, what they're taking advantage of, is a bit of naivete, because all education is meant to be formational, and God wants that education to be formational unto his glory and for his purposes, and so that people will know him. Does that mean we shouldn't educate people who have not professed faith or aren't Christians? No. But I think there's something interesting in there that they're getting at and they're taking advantage of, where I think Christians need to be strong, which is that educational is designed to disciple kids, and they're doing that, but they're doing it
Hmm.
in a wicked, predatory manner. That if you're talking with a 6-year-old about sex, that is grooming them in a certain direction, and
Hmm.
that word is typically associated with somebody who's grooming people for sexual abuse or pedophilia or whatever it is. But, like, that is what that is. It's like there's just not a way around it. What's some of the pushback that you've seen, some of the critical engagement on this concept that you've seen, where it's like, "Well, we shouldn't use that word." What are people saying?
I think, yeah, what I'm seeing most often is that somehow that is the insinuation, is that everyone on the left is a pedophile. And that's what my thread attacked head on. Like, I don't think everyone on the left is a pedophile. I think empathy is being weaponized to create situations where pedophiles can take advantage of. And I think, but it's still, there's still no other word that properly, I don't know, that I still think it's the right word to use, because you can groom someone. They talk about grooming someone to be a political candidate. It's
Okay.
just preparing someone
Okay.
for something. And I think, um, yeah, if someone has a better word, I'm up for it. But it seems to be a smart strategic move, because the left is very upset about it.
Yeah, for sure, and it's not just to get them riled up, it's putting your finger on something, because as we normalize talking with 6-year-olds about sex and all these kind of things that go along with that you're seeing come out in classrooms. What you're seeing is the normalization of pedophilia, as a
Yeah.
like the conversations regarding that. That is the normalization. That is how they're going to go. And that's what I keep trying to tell people, is like, there was an interesting clip yesterday. Dennis Prager was on the Bill Maher show,
Oh,
2019, and he was talking about transsexuals and how men can menstruate and all this kind of stuff. And everybody's laughing at him, like, that's insane. Nobody's saying that. That's not where it's going to go. And it's like, that's where we are today. And
yep.
that's how I feel on the issue of pedophilia, is like, that's that's right. That's the path we're on. And so this kind of grooming, it is the right word to use in my estimation, because what we're seeing is the normalization of it, and that's how they're going to justify it later. Is
Well,
there?
and if you
Go ahead.
if you look at the papers that they write in queer theory, they like attack head on the whole idea of childhood innocence.
Yeah.
Like, critical theory divides people into oppressed and oppressor groups, and they really believe that children are an oppressed group. And so the whole idea of childhood innocence, they would say, is an attempt to keep children oppressed, and that they would say they're sexual beings. They believe that every child should be assumed to be queer as default. And so the whole, and this is how they get otherwise good teachers to go along with this, is by these stories of, oh, these queer kids trapped in homes that are not supportive, and so we just need to be able to talk to them so they have a safe space to talk to, a safe adult to talk to, because at home they're being abused, they're being oppressed at home. And we gotta help parents wake up and realize, you've got to be involved in these discussions with your school. We personally homeschool. I'm not a hard line, parents have to homeschool, but parents do have a responsibility to be involved in their child's education. Like, that's our responsibility, especially dads. In Ephesians, that is given directly to the dad, to raise your child in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Yep. And if you can do that by delegating that education to someone else, that's great. But you have a responsibility to know that the people educating your kids are not working against the discipleship you're trying to do at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of round it out and connect it back to the other topics we were discussing, I think this is where it really, you start to feel great tension if you're a Christian and you're listening to this, or you're a pastor, and you're thinking, if I speak on this stuff, people are going to think I'm not a loving person, or people are going to perceive me to be a bigot, or like those people that have been in my church that are like lost, and like, I've been having gospel conversations with a little bit, but like, I'm still like, I'm not coming out and saying like what's going on. And I just want you to think about the parent in your audience. If you're preaching, you got one parent whose kid is going through this and being indoctrinated, and then you've got a 20-year-old who's coming out of the closet, been a Christian their whole life. And you've got one, and you got that person, and then you've got the parent whose kids are suffering kind of under this ideology in public schools. Dude, that's a hard needle to thread.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to try something, because right now the neutral world strategy was, well, they'll figure it out and we'll talk about it offline. That'll be a pastoral counseling issue, but we really want to make sure that she feels welcome here. Mm-hmm. That the girl who's thinking about coming out, or the non-Christian who's in the audience, we got to make sure they don't run away, because it's most important that we save their soul. And this other stuff on Christian education and like pushing back darkness and like speaking out on this stuff, attending school board meetings and like that kind of stuff, that's going to turn them off. They're going to think we're just like either religious right or bigots or don't love people. And I think that's where the rubber really hits the road for people. It's like, you got to make a choice. And me personally, that's what I'm doing with pastors in my life, is I'm saying like, you need to start taking a stand. You need to start using your voice. And, you don't have to get on Twitter or anything. God help you if you do. But at least like in your preaching and teaching ministry, as you're organizing classes for your church, as you're thinking about discipleship curriculum, these should be issues that you're pushing on educationally to help people think critically.
Yeah. And one of the things that, as a result of having this thread go so viral, is I've got people sending me their stories in my DMs, just of like, this is exactly what happened to my daughter. And
Wow.
It's just like, this is not just, culture war, hysterics. This is like real people are getting caught up in this and like, forever damaged by this.
Yep.
Even if they manage to come out and transition, like their bodies are still scarred for life. They never have kids. It's tragic. And at some point, like you're saying, you've got to decide, like, who are you? I know we're called to love everyone, but that doesn't mean that I think we need to rethink, think deeply about what it means to love that person who is, we don't want to offend by going hard on this stuff,
Yep.
because you're neglecting a whole lot of damage that's being done to, our most vulnerable.
Yep. For sure. Well, I really enjoyed talking with you. I love kind of our interactions online, and I always want interactions online that I enjoy to lead to kind of more face-to-face interaction. So I really appreciate you coming on the pod and spending time sharing your thoughts and your perspective on things. If you want to follow Josh, is the best way to do that get on Twitter?
It is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't think he's private or anything like that. So you can find him on Twitter. You can also go to podcasts and find him on the Great Awokening. You've got are you doing a regular kind of programming there, like once a month? What's your schedule there?
I'm really bad about getting them out, but I'm trying to do it more regularly. I've got one coming out this next week. So
Okay, that's great. And whenever I listen to yours, I'm like, wow, he's so articulate and careful with what he says. I'm just like, a little bit like, whoa. And Josh is very, very thoughtful. And so when I listen to your podcast, I really enjoy it because you're saying things at a level that is accurate, helpful, instructive, and thorough. And that's the kind of material that I think more people need to be exposed to. So go check out and subscribe. So that way, when he does drop his episode, it's right up there at the top. And just for those of you who are listeners on my podcast, if you can like this, share this, give us a great rating. My heart, as I've kind of talked about in the episode, is to have conversations on these matters with people. So whether it's Christians in your life, non-Christians in your life, your family, I'd love for this to hear that this podcast started a conversation. And then I can always use your help to kind of further the mission of having these conversations. So if you head over to Patreon, I'll put that link in the description. Head over to Patreon, sign up there. Any amount helps me kind of produce this episode and get these people on the show and keep having great connections and conversations. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.